know if there are any significant nutritional differences between the heritage wheat varieties and some of the newer hybrids? Or is that an open question still?
We haven't measured. Yeah, so maybe I'll get the microphone. So the question was if there were nutritional differences in the heirloom wheat varieties. Oop, I have your. Oh. Don't pull on it. I don't know why I gave it to you. And we haven't measured them yet, but some of the varieties that we have tested that we received from our partners at Washington State, they have tested them and they have seen nutritional differences compared to their modern day varieties. But we haven't looked yet.
Was the data, just to follow up, was the data from Washington State showing better nutrition?
Yes, better nutrition of some of the micronutrients. I got to remember specifically what they were. Iron. Klaus, you're shaking your head. So I think some zinc.
They seem to be more efficient in taking up some of the micros.
The micronutrients than the modern day wheats.
Right. I have a question along with that, and that is I'm wondering whether the when protein is measured for the bred wheats, do they just take the total N and multiply it by 6.25, which is okay? Eric, do you know? I don't know.
Yeah, Eric definitely knows, but okay. They multiply. It's 5.7.
It's a different.
It's just a different conversion factor, but it's the same idea. Yeah. So it's crude protein. So it could include some non-protein nitrogen in there.
Yeah, because you just might think that if you put nitrogen on late in the season, it might be sort of luxury consumed and just go into the tissue, but not really be protein. But I don't know.
That actually is a concern, and I've heard people talk about non-assimilated nitrogen. That if you put nitrogen on late enough, it will show up as protein in the grain, but it's not really, that's what you're saying. That's really late, that's after flowering, after anthesis, that becomes an issue, I think.
Hi, you all are doing trials of existing varieties, seeing how they grow. Are you working at all with breeders? Because I'm struck by what you're just saying about the scavenging factor, because breeders will say, well, if you want to breed for scavenging nutrients, just tell us, we can do that.
I'll do quick and then Heather, because she's done a little bit more, but not so much in the Northeast directly. There are a lot of people working on breeding and looking at breeding wheats in organic systems specifically, and it's been shown that there are differences, definitely. So if you do like a rank order of variety performance in an organic system versus a conventional system, the top varieties are not the same in both. And they've looked at heritage varieties as well to see if, well, maybe all the heritage varieties are the top ones in the organic system. And while those, there's different rankings, it's not always heritage varieties that shine and they do well in organic, but they're often the modern varieties are the top performers in organic. It's just that they're not necessarily also the varieties that are doing the best in conventional. So the importance of breeding in organic systems for wheat is really important. And you're going to do this tomorrow, right? You guys are talking about
I think and Julie Dawson is here, and I don't know if Elizabeth Dick is here anywhere, but we are having a session tomorrow on participatory grain breeding with a focus on wheat.
This afternoon.
And we've been, what's that?
This afternoon.
It's today, yeah, right. Thank you. But we have been working on a very small-scale wheat breeding project in Vermont where we looked at the heirlooms that I showed you, as well as that modern-day variety, and we evaluated those, and the farmers decided which of those varieties that they liked, and then developed some potential crosses that they would make. We tried to do it ourselves and we failed. This is the whole talk. So anyway, so we do have some varieties or crosses that we made, and we are actually starting to see that there's some significant differences in those in protein content, and it does seem like some of the older varieties have much higher protein than those that were crossed with the modern day ones. So Julie will be interested to see that. But, yeah.
I'm just wondering about what bakers and eaters are looking for, and what kind of feedback have you gotten on quality parameters other than falling numbers and total protein? In particular, I mean, with the micronutrients, I'm also interested in the amino acid balance. And like some of the sulfur-containing amino acids will have an effect on elasticity and the other qualities that are related to dough conditioning.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so what we are working with bakers, and just 2 weeks ago, there were a group of 4 bakers, Heather showed a slide, that did some, basically we're developing a protocol for evaluating, doing bake tests for the different varieties that we're evaluating. There's a big leap between a lot of the grain measurements and flour measurements that we know how to do, and then the performance, and it's like this black hole in between of really understanding what measures that we could do easily from the field, like protein, are going to consistently give us how it's going to perform in the bakery. And so it's really important to do that bake test. So the bakers are looking for something that's going to, give a pleasing loaf of bread, right? And then we did some taste, unofficial, but eventually in this project, when we get varieties narrowed down, we're going to do, the official double-blind taste test with the food scientist. So I think, those are the things. The we haven't gotten into the real detailed, nutritional components. I am doing that a little bit with a food scientist on that one trial I mentioned, the organic versus conventional, but not within the varieties. It's incredibly time-consuming and expensive to do a lot of those tests, and that's what we're running into is, the problems with that.
We also don't have a lot of the equipment to do some of the more extensive testing. So maybe someday. We got a falling number machine and a protein machine, and that's the best one.
Yeah.
Similar question.
Oh,
sorry.
Brian, did you want to?
No, I'm out of my league here.
Okay.
I've got a similar question. Did you do gluten analysis on any of them? And this is following up on the baking quality. We actually had some 9.5% wheat this year that we had some acidic bakers look at, and they started chewing on it. They said, we can make bread out of this, and they did, which means the gluten must have been much higher relative to the other amino acids.
Yeah, and we've seen that. Definitely that the bakers have taken, wasn't it Harvard that was sort
It's
of
like
low?
8% protein bread and made really
nice.
Right.
They made better bread out of it than some of the bread that was at a protein of 10 or 11%.
Yeah.
And that's one of the issues that I was trying to look at in that conventional organic stage. Not necessarily that it's really that useful to compare conventional and organic, but just that it sets up, the difference between those two soils sets up, the ability to actually see differences because those are so different. And we sent them for alveograph testing, and there's another farinograph, and you could go, serial chemistry is like, wow, anyway, it's very complicated. And trying to see if, and that's why I picked, treatments, the manure-based treatment with the protein level that would match with the fertilizer, and then sent those to say, okay, they have the same protein, but are their rheological properties going to be different? Just exactly that question. And a little bit, I'm still looking at the data, and it's just, I need to send in some more for another round of testing. But each of those, to have one sample tested was, over like $114 a sample or something. It's just like, it's really cost prohibitive to do a lot of that, unfortunately.
We did some, Susan Monahan, who's in the other room, had a graduate project where she was fertilizing with the poultry manure and cover crops and Chilean nitrate. And the bakers, Randy George, baked with those different flours from the different treatments, and he found that the treatments with the poultry manure actually produced the best bread. And we haven't actually taken it to the next step to figure out why, but it has something to do with the protein quality. And the folks in Quebec as well, Robert Beauchemin, who has a mill up there, has also seen this happen in wheat that's grown in different rotations with different amendments, having different protein qualities. So it's kind of a black box that needs some work.
Have you seen any indication that varieties that have higher falling numbers, just genetically or whatever, are slower to emerge or have less vigor or anything like that? Does that correspond to germination characteristics between those varieties?
I think I can help.
We haven't, but.
In the breeding work at Cornell, where they've bred for sprout resistance, which would indirectly, or actually directly raise the falling numbers,
That's true.
they have trouble making them meet germ standards under New York seed law because they're still in dormancy
Right.
at the time when they want to plant them. So it does have.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah.
Well, I have another question, and that is straw a consideration here? And I'm sure the varieties are quite different in terms of how much straw they produce as well. When we grow spelt in our experiment, it's a very tall grain. We just mow the straw and leave it in the soil. But are the farmers interested in that, or what's the story on that?
Oh, absolutely. It can really increase revenue a lot from the straw. Sometimes, if you're looking at feed grades, it can sometimes be as valuable. So we did a rough, we haven't measured so much straw. We've done like a total biomass, and then we tried to, take grain out of that grain yield and get an estimate of what straw yield might be. It's not perfect, and there were definitely differences among the varieties.
Huge differences.
Yeah.
Some that go from 1 up to 3 tons of straw. So, if you're after the straw, and there's at least one of our farmers that sells the straw for straw bale houses and has a market on that, so, but then there's the other group of farmers that really feels like they want to keep the carbon in their soil, so, it really depends. Yeah.
Go ahead, Klaus.
I think it's probably what you were thinking. In your low input experiment, if that straw were removed, it would kill that experiment.
Yeah, Klaus is pointing out that in our low input experiment, the export of nutrients, if we harvested and removed the straw, would probably really have a deleterious effect. And I guess one thing that I should say before we leave that question is that the soil test P and K numbers are going down in our low input trial. And they started at sort of low medium, and now they're in low and like very low. And so far, they still are yielding well. Now there's starting to be the high fertility and the low fertility. There's a difference in the corn yields in particular, but it's not statistically significant. Like, for instance, maybe a 10 bushel difference. And yet that can be an important economic difference if it's real. So that's, there's a lot of we're sort of, I think, pushing toward the edge. And at some point, I think we'll really be able to, I think, first of all, probably the clover will just not grow well enough because the phosphorus is too low. And then that will have a cascading effect on not as much nitrogen for the corn. So our approach is to basically push that limit and see how far we can go with it. And we'll probably hit that limit, I would guess, in the next 5 years. It's just a total guess. But it seems like things are heading, once they hit, bam, the zero level, it's going to be hard. But also I want to say, if you're growing clover underneath your winter grain, that makes the straw, you can sometimes still do it, but you have to mow it really high, and also it just depends on how much the clover has grown underneath the winter grain that one season. Sometimes it's up there pretty high, and sometimes it stays really low. So it can be done, but it adds another tricky aspect. Klaus has got another concept.
Sorry, this is an observation that goes to it actually deals with both, but you notice that the spelt yields benefited from the really heavy rates of chemical fertilizer, more than the corn and the soybeans. And you'd think corn being a heavy feeder, that shouldn't be so. And I think what we're seeing is the high rate of biological activity in midsummer, when the soil is dry and the temperatures are warm, is mobilizing nutrients through the soil life into the corn, where our winter grains, and especially wheat too, does its heavy feeding while the soil is still cool and still damp, so we're not getting the kick from the biological activity. And I think what we're seeing is that we need to maintain a higher fertility to grow high quality winter grains, especially to get the proteins high, to
Yeah,
together.
and I
with
think
the
that's
fact
what we were starting to see in our planting date study with the spring wheat, was that we were seeing these proteins that were, 1 and 2% higher than some of the other ones in the earlier planting dates, and I really think it had to do with when, the rapid uptake of nitrogen was for that crop. It was flowering, I think our harvest was about 2 weeks different for the first to the last, so.
How did protein dilution, as you get more yield,
Yeah.
you have,
Well, that's true too.
your protein
Yeah.
concentration
Yeah.
goes down, and it's just too much.
Yep. Effective in another.
This question is for Brian. Brian, where could we access the crop studies for vegetable production?
Okay, the question is where are the results from the vegetable experiment? And if you just Google, Cornell organic systems, it'll come up in the top 3 or 4, whatever, and you'll see the Cornell website, and that has the results from both the grain and the vegetable experiments on them. And tomorrow I'll be talking about the economic results from the vegetable trial as well. So I really was trying to make sure that we had representatives from our project here at the various points. So there's going to be people that are going to be making reference to this trial throughout the symposium. I'm really excited about that.
What was the cultivator that you used? And I missed, did you see any benefits to cultivating as far as nitrogen release?
Okay, so actually Lauren is doing a talk on that cultivator for weed management in cereals tomorrow, right? So you'll get to see lots more photos of it. But it's inconclusive, I'd say, in terms of the effects of cultivating on increasing protein, just in and of itself, not with the top dressing. They found in Northern Europe that wide-row system with cultivation often does produce higher protein levels, but it's unclear whether that's because of the spatial arrangement of plants or it's because of the physical mixing of the soil. And I've seen a couple studies, it's gone both ways. And then I've also seen, in Lauren's work, it didn't always show an increase, right? Sometimes it did, and you'll probably cover that tomorrow. So, I'm sort of interested in that cultivator, really, because
What was it?
It's called a Schmatzer hoe, but it's a steered cultivator, so that's the benefit. That version, you ride on the back because it's small. You ride on the back and you steer it. They have robotic versions of it, and for large scale production. But I think it has potentially has a really good role in vegetable systems, on vegetable farms. There are a lot of smaller farms in Maine are interested in growing grains, but there's a great risk to growing grains in the vegetable system. If organically, if weeds get out of control, really the cost, of the weed seed production that's going to, reduce your vegetable yields over the next few years. It's too big a risk to take. However, with the hoe, you really can control weeds more. You can go in multiple times over the season to do that, and so and that hoe might be able to be used in vegetables. So there's one farm that is looking at maybe taking the hoe and using it next year to kind of in some of its crops just to see kind of how it works.
Where's it from?
Germany. They have one in Vermont as well now.
We've used it in other crops like flax as well, and it's been, it was amazing the difference that it made in flax production and yields. We actually got a crop versus the weed issues we had in uncultivated flax. So it's a powerful tool, and it's, as for a vegetable producer as well, it's fairly inexpensive, at least that size. And I think we had it shipped to Vermont, brand new in a box for $4,000 or $5,000. I mean, they gave us a good deal too, but it was pretty inexpensive, really relative to the value, I think.
Follow up on that, did you consider using blind cultivation?
With the flax?
No, I'm thinking in the wheat.
Well, the
We did.
winter wheat we don't, because it's just not, it's such a good competitor, but spring wheat, that's a typical practice, absolutely.
Because that's a possibility on your winter grain too in the spring,
To incorporate the,
to use a blind cultivation.
We didn't, we haven't had to in
No.
winter wheat, but we have in the spring wheat, and we've seen a good difference.
Yes.
the only worry with doing it in the winter wheat is you probably have better weed control not doing that, because it might just stimulate germination.
Yeah.
So,
You had said that the incorporation of fertilizers with the hoe didn't really make any significant differences, but have you thought about any future experiments or other methods that you might want to incorporate fertilizers?
not so much. I mean, one thing would be maybe that, using the Lely or Kovar, like a blind cultivator to incorporate would be another method. You could do that in a solid seeded instead of a wide row if you did it early enough in the season. So that could be used at tillering stage as well. But no, not as much.
With regard to the Cornell trials, you have 4 very different production systems. Do you worry that you might just be better farmers at some systems than others, or when you're picking varieties that might be more suited? You're trying to maintain consistency so you can get good stats, and yet at the same time you can get 4 very different systems.
Yeah, so the question is about the Cornell trial. Is there a concern that we might be better at growing crops under one type of system than another, and that might sort of skew the results? I think the organic systems are similar enough that it's mostly just fertility applications that are different. Now, clearly that reduced tillage one, we were not very good at it, so that one suffered. But it's sort of an experimental one. I think there were organic ridge till systems that were sort of developed in the Midwest, and Dick Thompson of the Practical Farmers of Iowa was really well known for that. But he wasn't really organic, and he did occasionally put a little bit of Roundup or 2,4-D on his plots if the perennial weeds started to get out of hand. And that's really what we've seen is the perennials are the real problems that kind of go crazy in reduced tillage systems. I guess since it's the same people that are doing the work, which has been mostly me, I might be a little bit better on some than others. Clearly, we burned the soybeans one year with our conventional herbicide application. That was not so great. And that's one reason that I can't remember if on the slides if there was a Roundup Ready comparison, and that used the county yields, because the county soybeans in Cuyahoga County in New York are almost all grown Roundup Ready. So that kind of made the conventional comparison maybe a little more realistic that one year in particular. That's a good question. Yeah, I think in these system trials there are always those kind of things that emerge, and yet over time, I mean, presumably if the technician is doing all the different systems, they should come up to speed in all the different systems, and that you hope that the actual real differences between the systems will emerge over time, even if there's like year-to-year glitches like burning the soybeans with the herbicides. That's a tough question. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts.
I mean,
it's a really hard one. The systems trial I showed, that really long-term one, there was a biological treatment in that, and it was hard. Nobody at the research farm had any experience with trying to grow, that, and it took a long time. And then you end up with wheat, one
Right.
year miss, and then the wheat seed bank is really high, and you're dealing with that forever. And but you have to do just the best you can do, basically.
I can't resist saying one more thing about that, and that is that maybe in contrast to a lot of conventional agricultural research, we learn a lot from farmers. And the farmers are clearly the best producers using a lot of these methods and on a lot of these crops. And that's really, so that's why our advisory group is so important to us. And they'll straighten us out sometimes if we're getting kind of off track or if we're not thinking about things as clearly as we should.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Yeah. Go ahead, yeah.
Question for Ellen. How common is it for producers to Topdress from what you've seen? And follow-up question to that is, you use sodium nitrate. What if sodium nitrate's no longer allowed? Have you looked at other alternatives?
Okay, well, in Maine, it's pretty common to put on Chilean. You can only put on 20% of your total N need, so it's only like 16 pounds in the at tillering. That's just commonly done. What are people going to use? I mean, that's why we're looking at we did that Topdress study. I'd like to look at some other materials, seed meals. You've done a little bit with seed meals, right? I did a little bit with fish emulsion. I wouldn't do that again. I had to put it on with a backpack sprayer. But I know that. I'm dedicated, I tell you. And I think that's I would love, if you have ideas of other materials that might work well, that have a little higher availability than, chicken manure, which, has, but compared to other things, is pretty good. But do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, well, none of the farmers in Vermont Topdress, not any of the organic wheat producers. They're watching the information closely to see if it's going to do anything, if it's going to make a difference, if they can afford the cost. The biggest thing right now, which we tried to look at this year, but because it was so wet, we weren't able to, is how much damage does it actually cause to the crop to go out and Topdress, in a field. You had an estimate of 3%, but we wanted to put an on-farm trial out there, and it didn't work out because it was so wet, and the farmer would refuse to, even try because of the conditions. But so I'm not sure, unless we see something fairly substantial, if people are going to actually adopt the practice in Vermont. People are more committed to better rotations to increase nitrogen content in the wheat, and looking at other cover crops. And one of the things Susan looked at was a soybean plowdown, which actually had a green soybean plowdown, had a pretty significant impact on the protein content of the wheat, far more than any of the other treatments she used. And she also used not cheap, but some other poultry manure. But like Ellen said, another really good alternative for us is the oilseed protein meals that we have in Vermont, because we have some on-farm fuel projects going. And so there's sources of sunflower meal, canola meal, mustard meal, and soybean meal, and all of those are 6% or more nitrogen, and at least soybean and canola is pretty readily available, far more than poultry manure.
Anyone work with feather?
Feather meal comes the closest of any of them.
I have seen.
It's slower release, and it's got the sulfur-containing amino acids. So.
No, and there's someone did some work out in Nebraska, and I think they were looking at feather meals as well. Yeah.
I've got experience using poultry manure for Topdress, and when the weather conditions are perfect, we can get a phenomenal yield increase. And when the weather conditions are wrong, it doesn't do anything. There's a strong environmental risk to top dressing that early in the season.
So you mean if it rains heavily, it might wash away?
Well, the ideal thing would be to spread on frozen ground, have it thaw out, and get a gentle rain afterwards, because that puts the ammonia right together.
Just put in your order.
And when I've seen that happen, I've seen 150 bushels fell. Well, when it doesn't happen, I see the water get drowned.
Thank you, Mark. Very good.